Bodybuilding has always been a sport built at the edge of the body, the mind, discipline, and, in many cases, life itself. Over the decades, we've seen athletes build physiques that once seemed impossible, redefine standards, and carve their names into history as true legends. But behind the trophies, the bright stage lights, and the jaw-dropping bodies, there are stories that don't always get told in full. Stories of extreme pressure, hard choices, an obsession with perfection, and a price that, for some, turned out to be far too high. In this video, we're going to remember 10 of the most famous bodybuilders of all time who have passed away. Names that defined different eras of the sport, inspired millions of people, and left behind a legacy that still echoes in gyms and competitions all around the world. To start this list, we have to talk about the controversial Rich Piana, who was far more than just a professional bodybuilder. He became a phenomenon of the digital age, someone who went beyond the competition stage and straight into the daily lives of fans. At a time when very few athletes were truly open, Rich turned on the camera, spoke without filters, and built a direct connection with millions of people worldwide. What really grabbed attention wasn't just the sheer size of his physique, but the way he talked about the sport. Rich didn't sell a perfect fantasy. Quite the opposite. He exposed the dark side of bodybuilding, the risks, the abuse, the extreme choices, and the consequences that almost no one else was willing to admit publicly. That honesty made some people respect him deeply, while others saw him as reckless. That raw, often controversial attitude turned him into someone impossible to ignore. He became a reference point for an entire generation consuming YouTube content, blending brutal training sessions, an extreme lifestyle, and motivational speeches that always raised an uncomfortable question. How far is too far when it comes to chasing the dream body? When Rich passed away in 2017, the impact was immediate and global. The news spread fast, shocking not only bodybuilders, but also people who had never set foot in a gym. His death reignited serious conversations about health, responsibility, and the role of digital influence within the sport. After talking about the media explosion and excesses of the modern era, it's impossible not to go back in time and understand who Mike Mentzer really was. Unlike many athletes of his generation, Mike became known not just for his physique, but for the mind behind the training. He was one of the first to openly challenge what were considered absolute truths in competitive bodybuilding. With his heavy-duty training method, Mike defended something almost unthinkable at the time: less volume, more intensity, and recovery as a key factor for muscle growth. That philosophy split opinions, sparked heated debates, and forced many athletes to completely rethink how they trained. Mike wasn't just chasing bigger muscles, he was chasing efficiency and logic. That critical mindset also put him on a collision course with the system itself. Over time, Mike distanced himself from the competitive scene, frustrated with judging, internal politics, and the overall direction of the sport. For many fans, he represented the athlete who could see bodybuilding beyond the stage, but who paid a heavy price for refusing to play by the rules. In 2001, Mike Mentzer passed away relatively quietly, far from the spotlight his legacy deserved. His death didn't cause the same immediate shock as other losses, but as the years went by, his impact became even clearer. That's when many people realized just how relevant his ideas still were, maybe even more relevant than when he was actively competing. When people talk about bodybuilding's golden era, Franco's name comes up almost automatically. He wasn't just a champion. He was a symbol of raw strength combined with classic aesthetics. A two-time Mr. Olympia winner, Franco built an incredible physique despite not having the height of his main rivals, proving that size alone doesn't define greatness. A big part of his legacy is also tied to his historic partnership with Arnold Schwarzenegger. More than just training partners, the two formed a deep friendship built on trust, discipline, and shared ambition. While Arnold owned the spotlight, Franco was seen as the quiet strategist, the strongman who never failed when it was time to deliver. Franco also became famous for strength feats that went far beyond the bodybuilding stage. Events like car lifts and strongman-style challenges helped cement his image as a complete athlete, someone who represented bodybuilding in its most functional and impressive form. That only increased the respect he earned from fans and fellow competitors alike. Even after suffering a serious injury that could have ended his career, Franco fought his way back to the top and won another Mr. Olympia title. That comeback turned his journey into a powerful example of resilience, something very few athletes have ever managed to replicate at that level of competition. Despite all the strength, resilience, and discipline that defined his career, Franco's passing deeply shook the bodybuilding world. In 2019, he died after a tragic accidental drowning during a moment of leisure. The news shocked fans and athletes alike, especially because Franco had always been seen as a symbol of vitality, health, and longevity in the sport. Shawn Rhoden represents one of the most surprising stories in modern bodybuilding. For years, he was viewed as a talented but inconsistent athlete, someone who always came close, but never quite looked ready for the ultimate title. Very few people believed he would ever become Mr. Olympia, especially while facing such total dominance from Phil Heath. His 2018 victory wasn't just a competitive win, it was a complete shift in the narrative. Rhoden stepped on stage with a refined, razor-sharp, and perfectly balanced physique, highlighting details many of his rivals overlooked. That night marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, proving there was still room for aesthetics, muscle maturity, and smart competition. What made Shawn's journey even more impressive was how late his peak came. He didn't break through early. Instead, he built his best physique at an age that's considered older by bodybuilding standards. That changed how many athletes viewed longevity, showing that progress doesn't have to be rushed. After winning the title, he became a symbol of redemption within the sport. His story showed that discipline, patience, and constant adjustments could overcome limitations that once seemed permanent. To many fans, he represented the idea that it was still possible to win by playing the right game. Shawn's death in 2021 stunned the bodybuilding community. Just 3 years after becoming Mr. Olympia, he passed away suddenly, bringing an end to a career that still felt like it was reaching new heights. Andreas Munzer entered bodybuilding history as the most extreme example of obsession with perfect conditioning. His physique looked unreal, with body fat levels so low that many believed they were impossible to sustain. In an era already known for pushing limits, he took conditioning to a level no one had ever seen before. On stage, Andreas amazed judges and fans with deep muscle separations, dry muscle tissue, and an almost anatomical look. He quickly became the gold standard for conditioning, constantly referenced as the definition of the perfect contest shape. What most people didn't see, though, was the hidden cost behind that extreme appearance. His contest prep pushed the human body to its absolute limits. Every detail was controlled obsessively, with zero room for mistakes. That raised uncomfortable questions within the sport. How much does competitive bodybuilding truly reward health? And where is the line between excellence and self-destruction? Andreas Munzer's death in 1996 became one of the most frequently cited moments in bodybuilding history when it comes to physical limits. His extreme preparation ultimately demanded a price that was far too high, turning his story into a permanent warning within the sport. Since then, his name has been remembered not only for legendary conditioning, but as a symbol of what can happen when the body is pushed beyond what it can endure. Nasser El Sonbaty was one of the most imposing names in 1990s bodybuilding. In a decade defined by the rise of the so-called mass monsters, he stood out not just for his outrageous size, but for his consistency. Year after year, Nasser showed up on the Mr. Olympia stage as a guaranteed presence among the best in the world. His physique was the definition of extreme mass. A massive chest, thick, dense back, and huge arms made him one of the most intimidating competitors in any lineup. Unlike many of his rivals, Nasser managed to maintain that level of size with remarkable regularity, something rare in a sport where peaks and drop-offs are common throughout a career. Despite never winning the ultimate title, Nasser was often seen as someone who came painfully close to victory. He racked up multiple top placements and earned a reputation among fans as someone who had been overlooked. Many believed his sheer size and stage presence should have earned him a Sando trophy. Offstage, Nasser was known for his strong personality and blunt opinions. He didn't hide his frustration with judging decisions and federation politics, which made him feel more relatable to the public. To many, he represented the athlete who gave everything he had, only to run into subjective criteria beyond his control. Nasser passed away in 2013, marking the end of one of the most consistent and imposing figures of the mass monster era. Even years removed from his competitive prime, he remained a deeply respected name in the sport. His death also sparked reflections about long-term health and the cumulative impact of spending decades competing at bodybuilding's highest level. Serge Nubret was the embodiment of classic aesthetics in bodybuilding. Known as the Black Panther, he stood out not because of overwhelming mass, but because of perfect harmony between shape, symmetry, and stage presence. In an era when visual balance mattered more than sheer size, Serge became an absolute reference. His physique was defined by clean lines, a small waist, and evenly developed muscles. Every pose seemed carefully crafted to highlight the overall aesthetic, not just a single muscle group. That's why many people saw him as a true stage artist, someone who turned posing routines into visual performances. More than a competitor, Serge taught a philosophy. He believed in frequent training, high volume, and a deep mind-muscle connection. His approach influenced generations of athletes who weren't just chasing size, but a balanced and long-lasting physique. Even today, his methods are still discussed and adapted. Serge was also one of the great symbols of the Golden Era, sharing stages with legendary names while maintaining a strong identity of his own. Even as bodybuilding moved toward extreme mass, he stayed loyal to classic aesthetics, never sacrificing the elegance that defined his legacy. Serge passed away in 2011, closing the chapter on one of the greatest icons of classic bodybuilding aesthetics. His death felt like the final goodbye to an era when harmony, symmetry, and stage presence were absolute priorities. Long before Arnold Schwarzenegger took over Hollywood, Steve Reeves had already paved the way. He was the first bodybuilder to turn a muscular physique into a symbol of heroism on the big screen, at a time when that kind of body wasn't yet considered a beauty standard in movies. Reeves had a balanced, classic, and highly proportional physique. Nothing was overdone. His muscles conveyed strength, but also elegance, making him the perfect fit for mythological and epic roles. It was precisely that aesthetic that allowed audiences to accept, for the first time, a bodybuilder as the leading man in major film productions. By playing characters like Hercules, Steve Reeves didn't just act. He created an archetype. The image of the strong, imposing, and silent hero became directly associated with the muscular physique, influencing generations of actors and athletes who followed. Without Reeves, action cinema might have taken a very different path. His influence went far beyond movies and reached bodybuilding as a whole. Many young people started lifting weights not to compete, but simply to look like Steve Reeves. He helped popularize weight training for the general public at a time when it was still surrounded by myths and prejudice. Steve Reeves passed away in 2000, bringing to an end the life of an athlete who helped shape not only bodybuilding, but also the image of the cinematic hero. His death marked the closing of a generation that believed in the classic physique as a symbol of strength and elegance. Even decades later, Reeves is still remembered as the man who showed the world that muscles could also represent beauty, discipline, and inspiration. Chris Dickerson holds a truly unique place in bodybuilding history. Mr. Olympia champion in 1982, he wasn't defined only by the title, but by his ability to stay competitive for decades in a sport known for short, intense careers. His journey is often cited as a textbook example of longevity and smart athletic planning. His physique was always associated with refined aesthetics. Chris didn't rely on sheer size alone. He focused on symmetry, conditioning, and stage presence. Every detail looked carefully built over time, proving that consistency can be just as powerful as short-term bursts of dominance. Another factor that elevated his reputation even more was his discipline offstage. Chris was known for his professionalism, technical preparation, and respect for the rules of the sport. That earned him admiration not just from fans, but also from judges, coaches, and fellow elite competitors. Even while competing at a high level at an age considered advanced by bodybuilding standards, he continued to bring well-conditioned, competitive physiques. That reinforced the idea that it was possible to extend a career without completely sacrificing health, something rare across different eras of the sport. Chris Dickerson passed away in 2021, leaving behind one of the longest and most respected careers in bodybuilding history. His death symbolized the definitive end of a generation that valued aesthetics, consistency, and longevity above all else. Dallas McCarver represented the future of professional bodybuilding. Still very young, he was already competing head-to-head with the biggest names in the world, standing out for a rare combination of extreme size, muscle density, and stage maturity. For many, it felt like only a matter of time before he became a serious contender for the top title. What made Dallas so special was how fast he evolved. In just a few years, he went from rising prospect to a real threat on the Mr. Olympia stage. His physique kept growing steadily, while maintaining proportions that athletes at his body weight often struggled to preserve, only increasing expectations for what his future could be. Offstage, Dallas was seen as focused, disciplined, and respectful. Unlike some athletes from the new generation, he kept a relatively low profile, which contrasted sharply with the massive impact he made when he stepped on stage. That attitude earned him quick respect within the professional scene. Dallas' death in 2017 sent shockwaves through the bodybuilding world. Considered one of the biggest prospects of his generation, his early passing left a strong sense of unfinished potential. Since then, his name has come to represent not only promise, but also the risks and uncertainties that come with competing at the very highest level of the sport. After hearing all these stories, one thing becomes clear: bodybuilding has never been just about muscles. Each of these athletes left something behind that goes far beyond titles, trophies, or numbers on a scorecard. They influenced generations, changed how people train, compete, and even how they see their own bodies. Some became legends because of aesthetics, others because of extreme size, others for the mind behind their training, or the courage to expose truths many preferred to ignore. What they all share is the fact that they helped shape the sport as it exists today, with all its triumphs, excesses, and contradictions. Their journeys also invite reflection. How far is too far in the pursuit of physical perfection? Where is the real line between passion, ambition, and sacrifice? These aren't easy questions, but they're ones worth asking whenever we look back at bodybuilding history. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these stories impacted you the most? Is there a bodybuilder we didn't mention who deserves a full video of their own? Drop a comment, because your input is what keeps this kind of content alive here on the channel. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss upcoming content about the biggest stories, controversies, and legends of bodybuilding. And make sure to check out the next video that's popping up on screen right now. The story continues.